Thank you everyone for joining me with this inspirational interview with Jessie Winchester Schmidt. And before we start, I just want to give you a little synopsis of what Artful Minds is all about. Artful Minds focuses on the artist's artistic development and growth. We do that by providing exercise, inspiration, instruction, guidance, discussion, and feedback all in one place. We do this with our skill development posts, our weekly open office hours, our monthly challenges, our monthly critiques, our inspirational interviews, and our upcoming master classes. If you want to learn more about Artful Minds, visit artfulminds.ca, or if you want to check out past inspirational interviews, head on over to community.artfulminds.ca. Today, our inspirational interview is with Jessie Winchester Schmidt. He leads a double life collaborating on animal films indoor and painting outdoors. With his many years of animation experience, his work embodies a cinematic quality, I find, that tells a story in visually powerful ways. So just let me spotlight you for everyone as well. There we are. Now, I'm going to scroll through some of the selections of your work, Jessie. Could you just take some time to introduce yourself while I do that?
Sure. Thanks, Michael. That was a nice introduction. So my name's Jessie. Up until 4 or 5 years ago, I'd start off by saying I'm an artist. And now things have changed a lot in my life. And I'll start off by saying I'm a father of 2 amazing little girls. And I'm also an artist. And I feel really grateful to have spent 16 years full-time as an artist in the animation industry. And the last 8 years or so, I've been art directing in leadership roles, which has been quite fulfilling and meaningful. It's been quite a journey, lots of challenges and lots of blessings, high highs and low lows. And overall, I just am so grateful to spend my time doing this. Somewhere along the way, in fact, I remember the day working in an animation studio maybe a decade ago. I was doing color keys on a show, and that is where you're designing the light and the color for a particular scene in an animated project. And something clicked for me, and I thought, wow, this really resonates with what I love to do, with what I'm into. And I want to do more of this. I want to get good at this. And I asked my Russian art director at the time, shout out to Boris Andreev, an incredible artist. Hey, Boris, how do I get good at this? And he replied with some of my favorite advice I've ever gotten. You must go outside and paint. And so I started doing that, and I loved it. And I was really, really terrible at it. I keep thinking recently I've uncovered some of my earliest plein air paintings from about 10 years ago. And they're so bad. And I know you're probably thinking Jessie's being modest, but they're truly bad. And I see young artists or artists who are just starting with plein air, and they're starting off a lot stronger than I did for whatever reason. I don't know. So it was the beginning of a long journey, and a journey that I'm still on, and a journey that's become very much a passion and sort of a side hustle, but it doesn't feel like that. It's really just a passion. And so initially I started plein air painting to provide insight into my animation design work, to give me a better grasp of lighting and color so that I could do color keys better. But it's really kind of grown into its own thing. And now it's become, might sound dramatic, but it's somewhat of a sacred experience for me, where at the best of times, I let go of intention. I let go of any idea of what the product will be, meaning the physical painting. And I'm really just focused on being present and searching out feeling that I get from being in these amazing places and connecting with that, and then sort of trusting my training. And on the best of days, it almost is like I get to watch my hand paint what's in front of me, and I'm really just almost meditating on the experience of being there, smelling the humid canyon air, and feeling the sun and the wind, and hearing the bugs buzz around. All of that experience is kind of at the forefront of what is going on for me. And then after an hour or so, I step back and go, oh my gosh, there's a painting. And a lot of the times I go, well, that didn't work. But sometimes I go, oh, that kind of looks like how it feels to be here right now.
That's very cool. That's a very different approach I find for plein air painting. And you got me thinking about it. And the best pieces I think I've done too, I think fall in that realm. You really fall into the experience of where you are, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and beautiful work, by the way, Michael. I
Oh,
do really like your plein air stuff.
you're too kind. You're making me blush. Thanks.
I
You,
saw that. You went a little pinker there.
you pretty much answered one of my main questions is why do you start plein air painting? And knowing that when you first started out, a lot of your work were terrible, so was mine. What did you find the most difficult when you went out plein air painting?
Oh, everything. I think initially it's the combination of environment and medium. So environment is really such a huge part of the challenge, and it's something that you don't it's easy to not be aware of when you're looking at paintings that were painted plein air. So environment would be bugs is a big one. Wind is a big one. It's really hard to paint in wind. Sunlight, I bring an umbrella or a diffuser with me, but you don't want to paint with sunlight directly on your painting. A really, really big one that's taken me years to get a handle on is humidity, especially because I work in gouache, so it's water soluble.
For sure.
I've plein air painted down in Mexico and California, where it's a lot more arid, and the medium is completely different. It handles completely differently. Whereas here in BC, it's more humid, and especially in my favorite places in the canyons, you have those big 80-foot granite walls that are trapping in all that moisture from the waterfalls. So it's almost dripping wet in there. So the gouache almost handles more like oil in a way. And interestingly, if you look at California gouache plein air painters like Mike Hernandez, Tiffany Mang, their approach is dry brushing. Whereas if you look at mine, for the most part, it's more wet on wet. So, each of us are adapting to the environment. That was a big part of the initial challenge, just kind of getting my butt kicked of like, hey, I feel like going to paint outside. And then I get there, I'm like, oh, it's windy. Oh, these bugs, I didn't bring bug spray, and all these different environmental factors just sort of distracting from where you want your focus to be. And after some experience, I just know to bring bug spray. I know to bring an umbrella.
Yeah.
I know how to manage humidity, bring a little spray bottle if I'm not in the canyon, that sort of thing. And then the other big thing is medium. I work in gouache, and gouache is awesome. I love it. There's so many things I love about it. But there's one obstacle with gouache that is really frustrating out of the gate. And it's that it's value control. Your darks dry lighter and your lights dry darker. So everything gravitates towards your mids, and it's really hard to control. So when you put the paint down and it's still wet, if you're painting clouds, it'll look very bright. And then as it dries, they just drop in value. And it's enough to destroy paintings if you're not used to it. So that took me a couple of years to get through. I've seen people get through it quicker. And now that I know strategies to counteract or to develop the creative muscle required to get around that, you can get through that barrier pretty quickly. I'd say like a month if you're pretty dedicated, painting every day. Within a month or so, you can be over that obstacle. And then, you really want to get to the place where you can start asking yourself, what is it that I'm trying to do out here? Rather than struggling with mosquitoes or struggling with tubes of paint, really, looking inwards and saying, why am I doing this? What is it that I want to share with the world in this painting? And if you can get over those initial obstacles to those bigger, deeper questions, I think you're in a very exciting place that so many people have spent a lifetime exploring.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you revealed for what it's worth, the secret to understanding gouache. And it is the value shift, isn't it? I mean, once you get past that hurdle, it makes everything so much easier. Now, kind of shifting focus a little bit, given your experience working in the film industry, specifically your animation, you really must have honed your skills in your composition, design, color, and lighting. And so can you talk about a little bit more about this?
In animation, it's all about storytelling and composition, perspective, lighting, color. All of these are really powerful tools to tell a story and to orchestrate the experience of the audience as required or intended by the script. For me, I've always loved film. I love animation, but I also really love live action. Great live action really gets me going. So I've spent a lot of personal time studying film. I think originally I did it kind of from like a storyboarding approach. Back in college, I heard of exercises where you just watch a great film, hit pause every shot, and just do a quick little thumbnail sketch where you're not drawing detail, but you're establishing eye level, you're blocking out the composition, you're figuring out where the focal point is and how the overall perspective works. And
That's
initially,
cool.
you're going to be wrestling with the draftsmanship. You're going to be wrestling with, like, if you set a timer, how can I possibly draw this busy frame in 5 minutes? I'm getting caught up in detail. Once you get through that hurdle and you start doing that exercise enough, you start to absorb the language of storytelling and cinema. You start to see how great cinematographers and directors tell a story and tell it in their own way. How do they make us feel the way we feel? How do they make us look where they want us to look? How are things revealed in a scene? There's so many different strategies that different directors and cinematographers employ. You can start picking up on this stuff. And I did it for animation. I've studied it and continue to study it for animation. And I'm really glad that you can see some of that work its way into my plein air stuff. Interestingly, the plein air has taught me different strategies that lend themselves to narrative storytelling, visual development. A big surprise for me learning plein air came from the time constraint. I tend to work, my plein air pieces tend to be an hour or less. They tend to be small, 8 by 10 inches or smaller. So it's really a gesture of the lighting and the shapes and the color. And something that has been a huge takeaway, continues to be a huge takeaway, is it's really easy to become overwhelmed in such a short amount of time. How am I going to capture the robust experience of this canyon with a million leaves, a billion different greens, the water is moving, and every 10 minutes the lighting changes because there's clouds passing in front of the sun, and it's so dynamic. How could I possibly distill that into a painting in such a short amount of time? And the solution, I believe, is having a clarity of intent. Sometimes you find that along the way, or it can shift along the way or change, and that's fine. But the only luck I've ever had with plein air is when either in the beginning of the painting, right from the get-go, or somewhere along the lines, I really determine, what is this about? What is important to that thing, that feeling, that experience, that subject? And how can I reduce everything else as to not muddy the message, as to not distract from or take away from what is important? And it's really, really challenging. It's so hard. Our brains fixate with detail, and almost all of my work I look at and go, I got sidetracked or carried away, and that took away from the impact of the message. So what that's done for my understanding of filmmaking is, in film, we can ask the same question. What is this about? What is the important thing we're trying to get across to the audience here? And how can that clarity of intent inform the decisions we're making when we're revising designs or making decisions in surfacing or lighting? How do those decisions support that intention? And where are we investing our time in things that are actually distracting from what is important? Because almost always we are. So if we can identify that, we can become more efficient in where we put our energy, and also end up with a result where the audience responds more viscerally. So you don't have to explain the painting or the animation to the audience. You don't have to sit with them and go, oh, this is why I did this and this is what it's about. I mean, really, art, you should put it up and people get something. And if their experience is what you intended it to be, then you're designing with clarity. And so plein air has really helped me with that. And it's kind of been a two-way street of animation informing the plein air and vice versa in that regard.
Yeah, that's really interesting. They each have played off of each other, eh? And that point you make that everything else is pretty much just there for context and you want to tell your story about that more focal point. That was a big revelation for me many years ago, thinking, okay, now I don't have to worry about all this stuff. This tree over here can be really fuzzy. It can be a different value. It can be a different color. Just let it be. And then it feels like a forest, right? And it was just mind
Yes,
blowing how freeing that is. And I find it interesting that you can carry that through to animation, given how detail oriented animation can be, right?
that's a really good point. Yeah, by default, CG animation is extremely high fidelity. Everything is so textured. The risk usually is too much busyness, and a good art director, a good lighting and comp team will know how to reduce detail and lower contrast where it's not needed. And then the areas that you do want it will then shine brighter or have greater attention.
Nice, nice. It sounds like you have a team. Wouldn't it be nice to have a team while you're painting? You do the main area and everyone else worries about the other stuff.
Hey, not a bad idea. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. I think some painters have painted that way in history, right? Like masters,
yes.
like Titian would have like a whole like army of painters painting for him with him directing, I think.
Yeah, that's right. From what I remember reading anyway, yeah. Now, given that you've had so long in the industry and you develop a process and since you're being an art director, you have to create your kind of your storyboard right off the bat. And I can see that being a huge benefit for when you go out to plein air painting, because I would think you would have a stronger tendency to actually see the finished painting more so than someone else who doesn't have all that experience. What I'm asking is, when you on location, you see something you want to paint and you're intrigued by it, do you pretty much know what you're going to be, the finished painting is going to look like?
That's such a great question. And it's something I've been reflecting on since college, really. And I've asked so many artists about this. Like, do you see it in your head before you do it? And everyone's different. And I think there's some artists who not only see it, but see it with vivid clarity. Kim Jung-ji, I think, is one of them. I think he's trained his brain and built such a library and has a particular brilliance in his mind where he can see it and he's almost tracing it with his pen. And that's how he's able to do what he does. Me, I've never really enjoyed that clarity of, I think a lot of it is like visual memory, actually. And people's brains are different in that regard, and that's not my strong suit. What I can say is I find it really, really beneficial if before I start painting or designing, if I can see some things in my head that I know will be very successful or I feel very excited about. So if I'm looking at a busy forest and I close my eyes and I think about what it is that I find interesting, and if I can identify that and see a bit of that in my head and build that as a target, I'm much better off. And my chances of success are much higher. I find looking at master paintings helps a lot because you start to build a library in your head of, oh, this is how John Singer Sargent tackled this lighting condition, or this is how he tackled golden hour lighting on the top of a building. And you have that memory in your head, or maybe you've done a ton of studies on that type of lighting from master painting. So you can kind of draw on that. And then before you start painting, you have that recollection, and that really helps to kind of solidify the target of what you're going after. Not that you're a slave to it, but just that you have that insight as to how it's been handled successfully in the past. It's standing on the shoulder of giants, really.
For sure. I find it very interesting about you saying you're standing there, you just close your eyes and you kind of visualize what you want out of that scene. I thought I'm going to have to try that, because I'm reflecting back on other paintings I've done. And the more successful ones, I've always had a vision going into it based on what I see. But I think closing your eyes and just, for lack of a better word, meditating on it for a while, you could probably really hone in what the essence is of the scene, right?
I think so. I think it's really, really beneficial to build that muscle, that creative muscle. That being said, I also think it's very valuable for artists of all types to spend some time sketching without intention. And there's some great YouTube videos on this where it's just, you're not even defining a subject or anything. You're really just letting go of intention, putting your pen down and letting your hand move and seeing what comes out of that. And I know some great artists, illustrators, designers who work really low contrast in the beginning and slowly build up into contrast. And as it's been explained to me, that low contrast beginning allows your imagination to see things that you didn't even intend. So it's kind of like looking at clouds and you see faces, or looking at busy patterns and you start to see things that are interesting. In that low contrast pattern, you can start to have surprises, and you can leverage that into your design work or your artwork. I think both are important. I think ultimately we want both in our toolbox and have them at our disposal, depending on what we're doing.
That's interesting. I've never heard of that approach before, in terms of just sketching for the sake of sketching and let something evolve out of it. That's quite interesting.
I find it difficult because it's almost
sure.
like meditation, where the first 10 seconds are easy, but then inevitably my mind's like, oh, I know what this is. It's a cartoon rabbit. I know how to draw that now.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, that's not what I'm trying to do right now, brain.
It's so funny. Now, for everyone who doesn't know, Jessie actually has quite a few interviews on YouTube. Just search his name on YouTube and a few will come up. And one was with Jason Seiler. He's a fabulous illustrator, and a great one at that. Is he's done so many different magazines, and
yeah,
his work is
got
great.
2 Time covers now.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Huge.
Yeah. So it was great to see that he had an interview with you, and I watched the whole thing. One of the most interesting points out of that was you mentioned to him there was a time where you were working hard but not seeing any good results. And I think that resonates with a lot of us. I've been through that quite a bit, but one of the solutions that you mentioned were the critiques, and in that particular case, feedback courses with direct, honest, and critical feedback from those that have had more experience and can offer what you need to grow. And I was just wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I love this subject. I'm so passionate about it because it really was a very scary time. And I absolutely still struggle with self-doubt, and some days are more difficult than others. However, on those days, now I can kind of recognize it and go, oh, I'm doubting myself today. I'm going to encourage myself and be kind to myself as I struggle through. Whereas I definitely went through a good couple of years where I was working so hard. I mean, fanatically hard, to the point where everything else in my life was suffering from how much time I was putting into my artwork, my relationships, my health, everything. I was getting up at 4 every day and studying, painting, drawing, before going into the studio, working overtime at the studio, and then drawing again at night, and doing that for months and years on end. And there's the term hustle culture now. It almost sounds like bragging to say that stuff, like, oh, I was working 80, 100-hour weeks. Honestly, I was scared. I was scared of failure, and that negative motivation was really pushing me. I was early in my career and nothing was guaranteed. Nothing is still guaranteed, but I have a reputation now, whereas then I didn't. And it was all very scary. And that fear lit a fire under my butt and drove me to do everything I can to improve. That was all good and fine, although I have some regrets as to some of the sacrifices I made. I missed a good friend's wedding because I was working on some freelance, and that's a regret that stands out. And he's kind enough to forgive me, but that was a warning sign to me, and I suppose a mistake I had to make to help me realize what really is important, so that I don't go down that road, and I'm careful not to nowadays. So I spent a couple of years where I knew I was working harder than most people I knew, yet I could see artists around me making bigger progress. And as you mentioned, it was putting myself in a position where I was getting feedback from some of the greatest artists on the planet in exactly the areas that I was most excited about. I took schoolism courses. I'm a big fan of schoolism. There's a lot of great online schools these days. Schoolism's worked really great for me, but I think the important component is having that high level teacher. College is good, schools are good. A lot of the times, those teachers, and I have a ton of respect for people investing their time in education, they're not necessarily industry leaders. Industry leaders, world class artists, don't tend to spend 40 hours a week teaching, right? They're doing a lot of other things. Sometimes, if we're lucky, they'll devote a bit of their schedule to doing these courses online. And that was a big opportunity that I've capitalized on. So I was lucky, and I got into some courses where the teachers were my highest regard, really. And firstly, being exposed to their thinking is a game changer. Great art comes from great process, I believe. And people who have accomplished such a high level of artistry and skill set where they're consistently creating at a really, really high level, they have a very elevated mindset and way of thinking. And so when they embark on a challenge, a design, an illustration, a painting, their process is really quite mind blowing. And I remember initially thinking, wow, I had no idea there was so much involved. I had no idea how much thinking goes into this stuff. And it almost freaked me out and was painful initially of like, really, do we really have to move this slowly and think through each little thing that much? And then after a while, you start to find the joy in the process and let go of the idea of the result more, and find eventually, I mean, if you're learning from someone else, their process might be uncomfortable to you. And after studying from many mentors, you start to fold it all into what makes sense and what works for you. And that's when it starts to get really, really, really fun, because it's all of your own design. We don't need to do things that don't work for us. I do like to spend, if I'm going to study under someone, I want to spend some time really doing it their way and really emulating their process so that I understand what is working for them. And then when that's all said and done, I can take that away and assess, like, how does this fit into what I know? And what do I want to keep and what do I want to modify? That was the first big benefit. And then I think the second really big game changer is getting the feedback from them. And that's maybe another can of worms. I don't want to cut you off, Michael. What were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, when you realize how important the thinking aspect comes in painting, it can be scary at the beginning, like you say, but then it becomes a lot more freeing knowing that, yes, you have to follow the process. You have to do this. You get more enjoyment out of ideas and concepts and implementing them, right? And for me, painting is very cerebral because it's just not taking a photo and painting it on a canvas and saying, oh, look, I made a painting. And it kind of bugs me a bit when people come by, you're painting outside and, oh, that must be so relaxing. And you think, well, you have no idea. Like the fact that I even heard you was surprising, right? Because you're so involved. And realizing that it's not the amount of work that goes into something, it's understanding that there is a process to building a painting, to making a really good painting that I find so enjoyable now. And when I first realized that, it's like, oh my God, do I really got to do this? Why can't I just do it? So your experience is pretty much similar to mine, except you just had bigger names involved in it.
I was lucky in that regard. I mean, the internet is so awesome for that reason. I love that an artist in a developing country who aspires to work on animated movies, who traditionally would have no access to Hollywood or that school of thought, can go online and learn from people of that caliber. I mean, it's a great equalizer. It's changing the way industries work. For me, the way to not be overwhelmed by that is just knowing and earning over the years, earning the acknowledgement that there's so many artists that are better than me at just about everything. However, there's only one me, and I'm bringing something unique to the table. and there is a market for that unique thing. If I combine that with being good to work with, it seems to be a pretty good combination that keeps me employed.
Yeah, I think that's a good analogy of what artists need to do, especially when they start the negative thinking, right? Well,
Yeah.
who am I? I can't compete with this, especially when we go through the Instagram scrolls, right? How can I compete with this?
Oh,
Right. And I
it's
think,
intimidating.
oh, very. And I think the way I handle it is, oh my God, I just look at it, how amazing this stuff is. And it gives me a reason to analyze their work and understand it. And when I came across your work, and I thought, man, this is different plein air. I've never seen it like this before. And it's because of your cinematic quality. And every piece I see of yours, even your latest one of a that's on Instagram of a house, it has a little bit of light on the upper left-hand corner, and the rest is the cooler shadows, and it's very, very cinematic. And
Oh,
I'm starting to study that and trying to realize, oh, I wonder how I can incorporate it into mine. So I don't use it as a downer anymore. I use their success to drive myself forward. It's always a good way to
love
do it.
it, Michael. Yeah, for sure. I mean, if we all strive for our own excellence, the opportunities will manifest. And
Yeah,
that sounds like a lofty idea, but it's true. As artists, it's easy to fall in this idea that we're looking for work and we're hoping for clients and we're hoping for opportunity. I think it's a much healthier idea. And when you are around very successful artists, you start to notice their line of thinking often is more along the lines of, we're creating this content, we're making the paintings, we're making the movies. That is what is generating the opportunities. So if every single
100%.
artist on the planet achieved excellence, it would just mean there's more great paintings being sold, there's more movies being made, there's more comic books, there's more everything. And each of us has a unique voice. And if we are excellent in expressing that voice, there's going to be a market. There's going to be people who are interested in experiencing what you have to offer. So I really appreciate your outlook there. And I'm always looking for ways for us to empower ourselves as artists and beat that self-doubt, because yeah, it has a way of creeping in for sure.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what level you're at either, right? It's always
Right.
surprising for me to hear that this artist that I've admired for so long sometimes just can't paint. He or she has to take some time off.
That's right.
Yeah. So we've reached
That's
our
right.
30-minute mark. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to type them in the comments. While we're waiting, oh, here we just had one come in. So I'm interested to ask how Jesse balances his personal life with his self-improvement. Any thoughts regarding having a family and keeping growth as an artist? It's a good question.
Oh, that's a doozy.
It's a long one.
Great. Yeah, great question. I'm new to it. Our oldest daughter is 4. Our youngest daughter is 1.5. So I'm new to it. And I'm really just starting to find solutions to it. I would say both my wife and I are career orientated. My wife is an incredible therapist, post-trauma therapy, and now starting to offer couples counseling as well. So my life is one big long therapy session, which I actually appreciate. So she's very much career orientated with a master's degree. And I can relate to that as well, aside from the master's degree. So for us, what worked was waiting to have kids. We were both in our late 30s to have children. And I can't say that's the right way to do it. I can just say I'm glad I did it that way. By the time we had kids, I had put myself in a position where there was consistent opportunity and typically options through the highs and lows of industry and economy. After over 10 years, right around the 10-year mark, things started to get better in that regard. So I'm glad I waited that long. And then it allowed for me before parenting to be absolutely obsessive with my training. As I mentioned, I wish I had been smarter. I wish I had better learning strategies earlier on. And now I'm passionate about sharing those things so that other people can accelerate quicker than I did in the beginning. But having that time where I could go that hard was really, really critical to my journey. Now, as a parent, I don't have that. And I know some artists have kids young, and that's a different ballgame. And I now am adapting to two children, and two children seems like way more work than double one. It went from a lot of work to like every day is overwhelmingly challenging. And that being said, it's the most meaningful, fulfilling, magical, inspiring, love producing experience I will ever have. I love it so much. Our daughters are just wonderful to be around and to have a relationship with. I'm so glad. I'm so glad. So, I'm going to talk about some of the challenges, but I don't want it to sound like it's only grueling, because the meaningfulness outweighs everything. So now it really is a struggle. It is super, super, super hard. And my wife will tell you that I'm struggling with just that. It's a weekly discussion between my wife and I. It is at the forefront of my experience and thinking. I constantly don't feel like I have enough time for my own personal art. I'm blessed to do art for a living, but as an art director, more than half of my time is spent managing in meetings, supporting other artists, giving feedback. The minority of my time is spent doing art in my job, and then I get a very small window of time each week to do my own personal work. So it's really hard. The tools I have at my disposal that help would be time management and discipline. Time management is something I always thought I was decent at. I've always scheduled myself. I've always written down priorities and tried to number things as to their importance. But the last couple of years, I've really upped my game in terms of time management. I am working under a producer right now who is genius level time management, and she's helped me so much fine tuning how it is I approach time management. And that's really, really helpful. Little pieces of time add up. I no longer have a 3-4 hour window daily to train. It's more like an hour or less. So consistent little pieces add up after a month, after a year, into something bigger. And that keeps me pushing. And discipline is a big part of it too. And I think that part of that is looking inwards and soul searching. I'm 41 now, and my parents are old, and I really have a sense of how impermanent this is. And through that understanding, I feel a great urgency of making sure I spend my time doing what I think is important to me. And each of us needs to make that decision. I don't know what's important for you, and I can't tell you what it is, but I can talk about what it is for me. And first and foremost, it's time with people I love, meaningful time with people I love. And then second to that would be art. And kind of supporting both of those things. I think the triad really is health. Without health, neither of those first two things work very well. Kind of need to have us enjoy a certain level of health to support those other two priorities. So everything else in my life has to be sacrificed for those three things for this to work. Those three things are so time consuming for me now. Family takes so much time for me now. Two young people, one of them potty training right now. It's so much time that it's a big chunk of my week. And then work is a big chunk of my week, and sleep is a big chunk of my week. And then I get a little window every day to get a bit of exercise. And I am in acknowledging what is important to me and really being honest about how much time per week each of those deserves or how much I want to invest, there's just no time for anything else really. So I'm really, really careful about new hobbies. I live on the North Shore of Vancouver, which is apparently the mecca of mountain biking. And I have friends who love it and they're all like, man, you would love it. And I haven't tried it because I know I would love it. And it's just that I know with certainty that if I have any hope in being great at being a father, being a husband, and being an artist, I can't expect other things in my life to take precedent. I could be decent at many things, but I really want to be a great father. I don't want to just be decent sometimes. I want to be a great dad. I want to look back on life and say I was there for those girls and I was present and I did what they needed. And that's a big commitment. So things like TV, video games, extracurricular activities, secondary relationships, that's a really hard sacrifice because I miss a lot of people, but I've really had, for me, I've made the decision of like my brother, my wife, my two best friends, my direct family, I invest time in those relationships and I pursue time with those relationships and I make time in my schedule and I put a lot of effort into nurturing those relationships. And unfortunately, everything else kind of has to fall by the wayside. So time management, discipline would be the short answer.
Yeah, and I
Maybe I
think
should have just said that.
I really like your comment about being honest with your time as well. I mean, it's so true, right? We had a question come up while you're talking. I understand value keys, but I'm new to color keys. Can you speak of that?
Yeah, for sure. So when you say color keys, I think you're talking about what I'm talking about when I say color keys, which is it's a specific task in film and animation. So I'm going to assume that that's what we're talking about. So color keys, it's a task in animation where everything has been created and designed. So the characters are done, the environment is done, and the animation is done. And so you have a shot, you have a scene, but it hasn't been lit yet. And I will receive a grayscale image of the shot of the full scene. And well, I mean, before that, we have the whole episode and I go through the director and I have a budget of how many color keys we can afford. And the director and I will work together to say, okay, we can afford 5. Let's pick those 5 moments that are most influential and critical in terms of lighting and color. So then I will get screenshots of those moments and they're just grayscale. It's just black and white. And the lighting is temporary. It's just sort of a generic ambient lighting. No lighting decisions have been made yet. And I will quickly trace that frame with no detail. And I try and use straight lines, which is a great trick because it's easier to judge angles with straight lines. So just a very, very basic representation of major shapes and composition. I work super small, like thumbnail size, a couple inches wide. It's not about detail. And then from there, the goal of the color key is to establish all of the important lighting and color decisions. So typically in film, you often have 3 light sources: key light, fill light, and rim light. So key light is just the major light in the scene. It's often sunlight would be your key light, or the primary light in an interior. So you're making these decisions of like, where do I want to put those? Is it diffused? Is it direct light? All of the important decisions that go into designing light are made. And then quickly, in 1 to 2 hours, I'll do a painting of that shot, which, if successful, is a representation of all the colors and materials, the local colors. So a character has red hair and a white shirt. How are those materials influenced by the lighting of which I have designed. So if I put the key light overhead behind the camera, the character's front lit, casting shadows moving back, and there's a fill light below them, and then a rim light up, behind them to the right. I've made these decisions because I know what the story is, and I know what the mood is and where we're meant to be looking. So if I put this light here and that light there, it's going to create the contrast where I want it. And the direct light will give me shadows that create vectors leading to the focal area. All of this comes from studying cinematography, really. And if it's a successful color key, then without getting into details, so it doesn't look like a final illustration, I can hand that image off to the lighting department and they go, aha, it's this kind of key light, it's this kind of fill light, it's this kind of rim light. These are the temperatures, these are the intensities, and they can use those as a roadmap to then build and execute the lighting as intended. I really recommend Roger Deacon's website. He's one of the great cinematographers of live action Hollywood. His films are, every frame is a masterpiece of lighting and composition. And he opens his notebook to the public. It's free. You just sign up for an account and you get free access to his notes, and you can go through his version of True Grit, and he's charted out where every light is placed in every scene and why and how it impacts the storytelling. It's super insightful.
Wow. So color keying in your industry is quite different from maybe color keying in terms of painting and in terms of choosing your triads and your approach to it. It seems like it's totally different, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty different for sure. It's a lot different than fine art for sure.
But so when you plan your paint though, do you use this concept of color keys when you start laying everything in?
Great question. Color wise, I don't think a lot about color in plein air. I think a lot about temperature, how cool or warm something is relative to the scene. And my palette is always so limited. I don't have a lot of color to choose from when I'm plein air painting. I typically have 3 colors on my palette plus white, 3 or 4. So I'm mixing my greens and secondary colors. I am thinking about all the sort of storytelling stuff for sure. I'm thinking about how the lighting is working and what composition is going to tell the story I want to tell. So that stuff definitely comes out. There are plein air painters that I really admire who work with a much more expanded color palette that get into more nuanced color, and certain type of scenery really calls for that. Like sunsets, you really need some high saturation, warm colors in your palette, and I don't have them. So if I try and paint a sunset with my typical palette, it's gonna end not very well typically. So I would have to adjust my palette, bring in some different chromas to achieve that sort of intention.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. Oh, here's one for you. Oh, interesting. I struggle making artist friends with whom I could go paint outside to share my hobby / passion with. Any advice?
I'm the wrong person to ask that. I'm such I'm a loner.
Nomad, aren't you?
Yeah, I love plein air painting, adventuring solo. I get such a rush out of being somewhere where there's no one else, with just the right amount of danger, be it cougar territory, or the canyon is very steep and the rapids need to be respected. I don't take unnecessary risks, but just acknowledging that there is risk and managing that risk adds to the adventure. And I love it. My day job is so collaborative. I collaborate with 300 people, just under 300 people. Directly, I collaborate with dozens of people every day, but the project is nearly 300 people. So it's so collaborative that in my spare time, I go the opposite route, and I am very individual in the experience. But that being said, I know a lot of people who plein air paint in groups. Warrior painters down in California are prolific, and they go out and paint in the dozens of people. And they have a community, and I think it's really, really positive. They're awesome people. I've painted with them, and it's super, super fun. I do enjoy it. I have such a small window to paint in. I will get more painting done if I'm solo as well, because I'm not talking and I'm not interacting. Yeah, I'm maybe not the best person to ask, but
And for me, I would just say your local art store is a good place to put up on their bulletin board. You're looking for someone to paint. Local art groups, I mean, the whole repertoire of where you want to go from or start at, and eventually you'll find those one or two people that you gel with. Next thing you know, you're painting out every weekend, every second weekend, and it's a process. So
yeah, it is really beneficial. I mean, you learn different
oh,
things from being around different people, and
I
people
steal
are
so
awesome.
much when I go paint with other friends. And here's the best tip I can give you: always paint with people that are better than you.
Yes, yeah,
Right. So you can go look at their
absolutely.
stuff and you think, oh my God, look at what you just did there. And generally you're painting in the
That's
same
right.
location. And it's like, oh yeah, I'm taking that. And you go and put in your piece and it gives you that practical experience of instant, not well, depending if it works or not, making your painting excel more than it would have been if you weren't painting with that certain person. And that kind of experience I find is what really helps elevate your game.
Yeah,
So it's like having
yeah.
your on-site mentor without them being a mentor.
Yep, yep,
Yeah.
exactly,
Oh, here's a fun
exactly.
question, if you can answer it quickly. What are some of the shows you've worked on?
Yeah, so the last 5, 6 years, everything I've worked on is unreleased. I've
Oh, okay.
specialized in pre-production. So I helped DreamWorks develop 5 different projects. None of them have come out. One of them is in production and might come out in the next year. And another one is on the back burner for feature production. So what I'm getting at is I'm not able to share or talk about anything from the last 5 years. Before that, I did visual development on Hotel Transylvania 3,
Oh,
Sausage Party, Thomas the Tank Engine, Thomas and Friends. Those are kind of the bigger, better known ones.
that's kind of cool. That's
Definitely.
good. It's always nice, especially if your kids start watching them.
Yeah, the show I'm working on right now is a really big property that my daughters are obsessed with. So I'm pretty excited to release something that they will enjoy. It's
Yeah, no doubt.
definitely a new chapter.
Oh, for sure. That'd be so exciting. Two back-to-back questions, I'm hoping here. What was the best piece of advice that you've been given?
That's a tough one. Know thyself, I think, is great advice. And that's such a can of worms. That's very philosophical. What does
Mm,
that mean to know thyself? I think I run into danger when I start trying to understand the world. The more I learn, the more I have to accept I don't understand the world, and I can listen to experts explain it to me, and they might know something about their piece of expertise. But overall, it seemed that most of us, even experts, we kind of don't really know what's going on here. So it's this it's a one-way street to crazy town if I'm trying to convince myself that I get it, that I understand life and the world and how things are working. However, if I look inwards, I have the opportunity to understand, why do I feel the way I feel from moment to moment? And who am I? Who is this person that thinks they're talking right now? Am I my thoughts, or am I something behind the thoughts? And what is the relation of that to the world? And the more I invest time in that, the more able I am to live a meaningful life. So know thyself, I think, is great advice.
last question. What would be your piece of advice for yourself, let's say 5 years ago?
Yeah, great question. If I went to 10 years ago, it's very clear to me. I had some habits in my life that were negatively impacting my values and my priorities. I was in college, I was easily distracted and partying a little bit too much in ways that were not beneficial to the things that I knew were important to me. And in some ways, I had to go through that to help me understand who I am and what is important to me. But the thing is, at the time, I knew that some of the things I was doing weren't the best for me. And if I had just been more moderate in those decisions and more disciplined, of like, it's okay to go to a party, it's okay to get drunk now and then, if that is something that you find value in. But if you're doing it a lot and you're seeing it impact your values, it's a problem. So it's hard, but the sooner we can really feel the excitement of what it is we're here to do in this lifetime, and really allow that to take over our experience, so that every day when we pop out of bed, we feel something really powerful in us, of like, today, as hard as it might be, is another opportunity to be the person who I want to be and do the things I want to do, regardless of what the world throws at me. To allow that to drive our decision making and to be aligned with our values, I think is so powerful. And I think that will help each of us move towards our own personal excellence more effectively. And I really do hope that for every artist.
Yeah, I really like that advice. And don't be so hard on yourself. We're all stupid when we're young, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I still am. And yeah, that's great advice too. I find it's helpful to be self-critical, meaning I look at my work and go, what is the difference between my work and the masterwork that I admire? Or what is the difference between me as a friend or me as a father and what I understand to be the best type of friend or the best type of father possible? And immediately in comparing those two things, I'll see the difference and go, aha, that's the gap that I aspire to close today and moving forward. So that's being critical. But what I don't allow, and what I hope each of you can not allow in your internal dialogue, is any sort of dialogue of you're stupid or you're not worth it or you don't have what it takes. That's not productive. It's not true. It's just hurtful. Would you ever speak to your friend that way? No. So I choose to be critical, very much so, with myself. And that helps me understand how I want to move forward.
Yeah.
But the second my brain is like, oh, you're dumb, that was a dumb mistake, I just say, whoa, hold on. It's not okay to talk to myself that way. Show myself some respect, silly brain. And I don't allow for it the same way I wouldn't allow someone to speak to my children in that way. So just as you said, Michael, let's be kind to ourselves as we continue this incredible journey as artists.
I love that. That's great. Thank you for saying that. And I think that's a great place to end off on. This interview took a different turn than I anticipated, but I think it turned out even better than I ever wanted. So thanks for opening up. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for letting me talk to you. Thanks for being here on your busy schedule. I know you're jam-packed, so I really appreciate that. And I hope everyone else enjoyed it. Looks like through chat, everyone says, thank you, great advice, thank you. So I think we've both had a successful interview here.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Michael. I'm a big fan of your art. I really like what Artful Minds is doing. I wish you all the best. I hope to keep in touch. Thanks to everyone else. I wish you all a very inspiring day. And I hope you all pursue your own personal excellence.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, everyone.